Hi everyone, I am Jason Alcott. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back to the channel. I'm the author of The Sewing Principle, and I'm so glad that you're here today. I am excited to talk today a little bit of a different vein from what I do in some of the other videos. I want to talk about a more current event and then draw some leadership lessons, personal growth lessons out of this event that's happened in September. And what I'm talking about is the Adobe acquisition of a company called Figma. It was announced on September 15th, 2022, that Adobe, the software company that we all know and love for helping us open our PDFs, acquired a company called Figma for $20 billion. And I'm kind of going, when I heard this, first of all, who's Figma? What do they do? Like, do they make Fig Newtons or something? I mean, I love Fig Newtons, but I just can't see Adobe acquiring a cookie company. And did they say 20 billion with a B, like $1 billion? That's a huge number. And immediately I'm going, what's going on here? Yeah, I did a little bit more research. I dove into this and it's a fascinating story. Figma is actually a software company that is in the creative space, very similar to Adobe, allowing creative people to work on things like Adobe's got like Photoshop in their suite of products. Figma is a similar idea, allowing creative people to work, but it's all web-based and it allows collaborative and creative people to work together and collaborate on projects because it's all over the web. And so a lot of people actually saw Figma as a potential threat to Adobe in the future. They're sort of this up-and-coming software startup. It's only a 10-year-old company, and when it was started by a couple of co-founders, one of them by the name of Dylan Field, who was actually only 20 years old when he started the company, so still only 30 years old today at the time of acquisition. And so it's sort of this kind of crazy story, and we're sitting here and there's tons of press. Adobe's stock price fell like a rock. Apparently people didn't think that that was maybe the best acquisition, but there was a lot of hype, a lot of talk about this moment in time. And I wanted to draw your attention to two things out of this that we've sort of been talking about in previous videos because they're happening right now in this current event story. So the first thing I wanted to point out was that this is an egg story. You might remember a couple of videos ago, we were talking about Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and we were talking about the flywheel concept. And he's got this idea in there where he talks about the transition of going from the egg to the chicken. And he talked about it as if it was like a press release. Man, this massive transformation, like 1 minute you had an egg and the next minute all of a sudden it hatches and there's a chicken. And this was sort of me. I'm driving along hearing about this acquisition and I have no idea who Figma is, but all of a sudden it's like, bam, there's a chicken. Where'd they come from? $20 billion company. I didn't even know who they were. That's not my vein. I'm not really a overly creative person in the digital space. I don't spend a lot of time there, so I hadn't heard of Figma or what it is they do, but 20 billion is a big number. So it kind of feels like that idea, right? Of like, there was an egg and now there's a chicken and now there's this $20 billion acquisition company. And isn't that interesting? Because when you think about it, was that what happened? Was it an overnight success? Was it a Cinderella story? Or is there more going on than meets the eye? So I did some research. I started reading about this and listening to some podcasts. And of course, there's more going on than meets the eye. And just like in the story from Jim Collins' book, where they talk about this chicken and the egg idea, you know, from the outside, it looks like it goes bam, from egg to chicken, and it just happens in an instant, right? The $20 billion acquisition. But from the inside, it must have been much more like it was like for the chicken inside the egg for Dylan and his team, right? They'd been around for 10 years, and I did a little bit of research into this, so they started in 2012. Well, for those first 3 years, it looked like nothing was happening, like literally nothing. Like they didn't ship a product. They didn't have a product for the first 3 years. It wasn't until 2015 they actually released their first closed beta product. And what that means is basically you had to know somebody who knew Dylan to get invited to test out the product in 2015 that nobody knew anything about. So very closed release, very quiet. So 3 years of like absolutely nothing. Now there's at least a product. And there was even early investors that said that, you know, when they were originally pitched this idea by Dylan and his team and, you know, those early years, they're like, we don't think you know what it is that you're building yet. And they probably didn't. They didn't know what problem they were trying to solve for the world. And then it wasn't actually until 2017 that they actually released a product that they charged for and actually started having revenue for. So 5 years into the start of their company, they actually start to begin to even generate any revenue as a software company. And then after that, you know, they slowly started to grow, the flywheel started to go, and all of a sudden you've got this company that's doubling year over year over year. And now you fall into 2022 and they've been acquired for 20 billion. But those first 3 to 5 years, there's not a whole lot going on. And you know, if they came to you and asked you to invest now, you'd be like, oh yeah, I totally would have invested. But would you? Like if you were sitting at the table, would you have invested if they had no product, if they were still developing the idea? And it really made me think, you know, what have I been pouring myself into for more than like 6 months or a year, where I'm willing to see it through, where I'm willing to keep going and see it through for like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, if I believe it's the direction that God is calling me towards, if I believe it's what I'm supposed to be sowing into. Am I sowing into it with no results, no feedback, nothing to sort of show for it, but knowing that this is the direction that I'm supposed to be going, sowing into that purpose, sowing into that vision and that plan for long enough for it to actually become something. Well, am I willing to go through that growing period where it's so much, we do something, I launch a video and nobody watches it and I was like, oh man, maybe I should just quit. Have I done that? Have I been willing to do that? In most cases, I'll get 3 months, 6 months, a year in, and I don't have any results, or it doesn't look like anything's happening, and I quit. And I think a lot of us do this. But then when we watch it sort of play out over years 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, then you start to see all of a sudden the sowing principle is in action. There's a harvest starting to come, and the compound effect, and the slight edge, and that hockey stick starts to take off. And I know then it becomes a little bit of a Cinderella story, but I guarantee that when you're in those first 3, 4, 5 years, it didn't feel like that. There was challenging times, really challenging times, as to whether or not they were going to be able to continue, whether or not they had the right product, or could they develop the right product? Should they even continue in the right direction? And so I just wanted to draw your attention to that in this story to encourage you. Pour into the direction that God's calling you to. Pour into it with more effort and energy than you probably think it's going to take, for longer than you probably think it's going to take. If God's called you to it, there's an incredible impact that he wants to have in and through you to do it. And the second thing that I wanted to draw your attention to with regards to this acquisition is I was listening to a conversation between Dylan Field, one of the co-founders, and a podcast that was put together by TechCrunch. So a very tech-focused podcast, and they definitely brought him on to talk about, the incredible product that they built and the design features and how they were serving the community. But only a couple of minutes in, what they ended up diving into was his leadership growth and what he had to go through to become the leader that he needed to become in order to be able to have this company grow into what it is today. Isn't that fascinating? This is not a leadership podcast. That was not their purpose. They were there to talk about how amazing the product was and the technical aspects and how it served the community. But they recognized that in order for a company to go from starting to where they are today with this acquisition, that something needed to be there more than just a great product. And we've talked about this. We've talked about this a fair bit over the last couple of videos. Leadership matters. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And everything else being equal, you can have this incredible product, but if you can't take that product and that team and actually bring them all together, then nothing happens, right? And so they dove into a little bit of Dylan's leadership journey, and it was super fascinating because he was 20 years old when he started. And you can be a leader at any age, but at 20, you don't have as much life experience. You've probably had somewhat limited leadership experience, and he was really upfront about that he made a lot of mistakes, had a lot of learning to do to develop his leadership skills, and still does, right? To develop his leadership skills, to lead a team that started out with a couple of people, and then it's 5, 6, 10, 15, 20, and it grows into whatever number of staff and team members that they have today. But he was very upfront that was a real challenge for him, that he had to learn to serve people, to equip people, to allow people to run, to help to build the culture. It was inspirational to me because if he can learn that, if he can continue to learn that, then I believe that I can continue to learn that. Not that my goal is to have a company that's worth that amount of money, but be able to lead and serve a team, because look at the impact that is being had through that product now. Look at the impact that's being had in the lives of all those people that invested in the company and the people that believed in him when nobody else did, and the people that are now on that team and have all been benefited from this acquisition. So growing in your skills as a leader is going to benefit you regardless of what it is that you're working on. So developing and sowing into who you are as a leader so that you can uplift and encourage other people and allow them to lead and empower other people, as we've talked about, it's going to serve you as a leader. It's going to be a differentiator in your life. So today I just want to encourage you to continue to sow into what it is that God's calling you to work towards, and sow into it consistently for long enough to allow that to grow and to develop into what God wants for you, the impact that he wants to have in and through you. And then also to grow and sow into your leadership development, to sow into who you are and developing who you are as a leader so that you can serve and equip the teams that you're serving right now, or the teams that you're going to be able to serve and equip in the future. So I'm so excited about what God is working on in your life, the impact that he's having already through you, and the impact that he wants to continue to have through you. And I just hope that you have an absolutely blessed rest of your day, and I look forward to sharing with you again next week. Thanks, everybody.